Tragedies. Why are they so popular? Well, according to our good friend Google, tragedies are popular because they resonate with fundamental human experiences and emotions, offering insights into life's complexities and challenges. They can evoke strong emotions like pity and fear, leading to a cathartic release. Additionally, tragic narratives often explore universal themes like death, love, and betrayal, prompting reflection and moral questioning. But that doesn't explain why they are so popular today. That says why they've been popular since, well, forever. Shakespeare capitalized on tragedies in the 16th and 17th centuries, and even then, their popularity was a thing. Even the famed Greek tragedies go back to 5th century BC. And guess what? The South isn't going to be left out. There's a whole genre called Southern Gothic for a reason. And today, we'll look at one of those tragedies. One history called the Beauchamp-Sharp Tragedy, or sometimes it's simply called the Kentucky Tragedy. Everyone loves a good, strange, weird, or bizarre story. Well, welcome to the American South, where dark legends and haunted history lurk around every corner. Where superstition, folklore, and a touch of backwoods magic blend with everyday culture. Some say, in order to survive. This is Dixie After Dark. Before we jump into today's story, I encourage you to take a moment and visit the channel Beasts of the Old World. I've been following this channel for a good while now, and their tellings of old Germanic and Celtic folklore keep me hooked. More recently, though, Beasts of the Old World has decided to dip their toes into the American South, and I had the honor and privilege to collaborate with that channel on a presentation from my home state. It's a story you're not going to want to miss. I'll link that presentation here and in the description as well. Go give it a listen. You won't regret it. And let Beasts of the Old World know that I sent you over. And now, here's today's story. Which one do you think can push a person to hatch a downright evil plot against another human being? Politics or romance? What about those rare instances where the two are combined? Let's go back to 1800s Kentucky and find out. Today's story revolves around a man named Jeroboam Beauchamp. He was born in Barron County, Kentucky in 1802. Beauchamp was a smart young man, doing pretty well in school, and by the time he was 18 years old, he had decided he would become a lawyer. He began sitting in on different trials and cases as much as he could in both Bowling Green and Glasgow, Kentucky, taking in and learning everything he could. Out of all the people Beauchamp looked up to and studied under, though, one person really caught his eye, a man named Solomon P. Sharp. Sharp had an impressive resume, one that captivated young teenage Beauchamp. By that time, Sharp had already served 2 terms in the state legislature, as well as 2 terms in the U.S. House of Representatives. To Beauchamp, Solomon Sharp was living the life that Beauchamp wanted for his own future. The prestige, the notoriety, the legal fame. Sharp's achievements were the things that young Beauchamp dreamt about. The young, ambitious teen set out to study Sharp's life and methods, all with the best intentions in mind. But at the time, Sharp, who was a married man, was rumored to be having an affair with a woman named Anna Cook. the daughter of a wealthy planter in the area. Cook was pregnant, and her pregnancy ultimately ended in a stillbirth. Anna Cook claimed that Sharp was the father of the child, but Sharp denied it, and without modern medical tests like we have today, the issue was left up to the he said, she said court of public opinion, and the public largely sided with their famed politician, Solomon Sharp. Anna Cook's name and reputation was dragged through the mud, and she ended up shying away from the public after that. She became a recluse for the most part, and stayed held up in her mother's plantation home right outside of Bowling Green. None of this sat right with young Beauchamp, though. From all accounts, it seemed that he probably believed Anna Cook's side of the story. And as far as Sharp's involvement in actions, well, that just wasn't the honorable way to act. Beauchamp's once hero and inspiration was now a borderline villain. But even with that being the case, Beauchamp wanted to know more. One can speculate this was maybe out of curiosity. Maybe it left such a bad taste in Beauchamp's mouth that knowing more would bring some type of closure to his mind. Maybe he just wanted to learn from Sharp's own mistakes to avoid making them himself. He did look up to Sharp after all. Or maybe, just maybe, Beauchamp had developed some twisted obsession with Sharp, and he viewed Cook as something that had once belonged to his hero, but was now discarded and free for the taking. Whichever it is doesn't really matter, because in any of those scenarios, it would be Beauchamp's naive young mind that would be his undoing. Sure, we can say times were different then, and 18 years old was a man in those times. But still, life experience carries with it a certain knowledge that you can only learn the hard way, on your own, and over the course of many years. Beauchamp's own father lived only about a mile away from the Cook family estate, and in the end, Beauchamp's curiosity and own personal drive got the better of him. Beauchamp began visiting the Cook estate under the ruse of borrowing books from the family library. It was a gradual process, but Beauchamp eventually gained the trust of Anna Cook, and within a year's time, the two went from a friendship to a courtship in the summer of 1821, despite the fact that Beauchamp was still 18 years old and Anna Cook was 34. By all accounts, the two were infatuated with each other, true enough, but Anna had one condition before the two could be wed. Jeroboam Beauchamp would have to come to the defense of Anna Cook's once good name. He would have to kill Solomon Sharp, and Beauchamp happily agreed. Beauchamp set out to challenge Sharp to a gentleman's duel. By this time, though, Sharp had been appointed to the position of State Attorney General by Governor John Adair, so he was no longer in Bowling Green. This didn't bother Beauchamp any, though, and he set out on the over 150-mile journey to Frankfort to confront Sharp, despite Cook's insistence that Sharp would not accept any sort of challenge. According to Beauchamp, Anna was right. Upon arriving in Frankfort and calling him out, Sharp would have nothing of it. In Beauchamp's own account, he bullied and harassed Sharp to the point that Sharp himself begged for his life. Beauchamp promised to continue the daily routine, including horsewhipping Sharp daily until he agreed to a duel. Beauchamp stayed in Frankfort for 2 days, waiting for Sharp to finally face him. But there was a catch. While Beauchamp had thought Sharp went into hiding, the fact was, Sharp had skipped town. By the time Beauchamp found this out, it was said that Sharp was on his way home to Bowling Green. Beauchamp rushed home to find Sharp, but discovered that Sharp was not there, and had not been there for quite some time. Beauchamp then decided to chill out for a bit, realizing he needed a better plan. But Anna Cook, it seemed, grew impatient, so she decided to go after Sharp herself. When she received word of Sharp's next visit to Bowling Green, she sent Sharp a letter. In it, she denounced what all Beauchamp had done, and stated that she had broken off all ties with him. She ended the letter asking Sharp to visit her before he left town, so she could properly apologize. Sharp sent word that he accepted and that he would be by in 2 days' time, so Anna Cook and Jeroboam Beauchamp hatched a plan and laid in wait. The day of the planned visit from Sharp came and went, and Sharp was a no-show. You see, Sharp was a lot smarter than the two had accounted for. Sharp was suspicious the moment he received that letter, and had up and moved back to Frankfort that same day, 2 days before he said he would visit Anna. Of course, Cook and Beauchamp didn't know this, so Beauchamp eventually rode into town to see what was going on. It was then that he found out Sharp had left town, but Sharp had left so abruptly that he had left a substantial amount of unfinished business behind. Beauchamp knew that Sharp would eventually have to return to finish whatever he had left behind, so Cook and Beauchamp decided to just wait. Beauchamp decided to set up shop in Bowling Green to cement his reasoning for hanging around. He started up a law office and practiced there in Bowling Green throughout all of 1822 and 1823, but Sharp never returned. Despite the fact that Beauchamp never achieved the goal of Cook's original request, the two were married in June of 1824. That should have been the end, but by that time, Beauchamp was obsessed with the idea of Sharp, and immediately after the wedding, Beauchamp came up with a new plan. He began flooding Sharp with letters, each signed with a fake name, and from different post offices. All of the letters requested Sharp to help settle different land disputes, each one requesting to know when Sharp would be back in the area. But still, it seemed that Sharp was too smart for them. He only ever replied to one of the letters, a full year later in June of 1825, but he never gave any details of his travels. It turns out that Sharp was a busy man. While serving as State Attorney General, Sharp found himself in the middle of the Old Court, New Court controversy brought on by the financial panic of 1819. The New Court faction sided with people looking for financial relief, while the Old Court faction sided with banks and creditors who said people should continue to meet their financial obligations. Sharp was part of the New Court faction, but by 1825, that party was losing their grip on power, so in an effort to help the party at large and give them more power, Sharp resigned as Attorney General and ran for a seat in the Kentucky House of Representatives against Old Court Representative John Crittenden. That campaign season turned particularly ugly, with Old Court supporters bringing up Sharp's alleged involvement with Anna Cook. Flyers and pamphlets were posted everywhere, telling how Sharp had fathered Cook's child and abandoned them both. Despite all of this, Sharp still won the election, but the old wounds had been aggravated when the word of the campaign tactics reached Beauchamp and Cook. And this time, well, it seemed that Beauchamp had had enough. The honor of a gentleman's duel was taken off the table. The timing was perfect. Beauchamp decided to resort to cold-blooded murder and let the suspicions fall on Sharp's political rivals. Beauchamp rode to Frankfurt under the disguise of business, with the plan of doing the deed right before the General Assembly's opening session. He arrived in Frankfurt on November 6, 1825. But with all the hoopla of the newest session of government about to begin, there was no rooms available at any of the hotels. Beauchamp had to resort to renting out a private room from a local, Joel Scott, who happened to be the warden at the state penitentiary. Late that night, Beauchamp set out from the residence in a disguise. He went to the nearby Kentucky River and secretly buried a set of his own clothes, then set out to find Sharp once and for all. Beauchamp went to Sharp's home, but he was not there. After lurking around town for a bit, he finally found Sharp at some sort of gala event at a nearby hotel. Beauchamp gambled that it was unlikely Sharp would be staying at the hotel, since it was within walking distance of his own home, so Beauchamp secretly returned to Sharp's home and hid nearby. And this time, his gamble paid off. Sometime after midnight, he saw Sharp return home and go inside. Beauchamp waited nearly 2 more hours before approaching the house in the wee hours of November 7th, 1825. Beauchamp knocked on the door, and when Sharp opened the door, Beauchamp stabbed him in the chest, right there in front of Sharp's wife, Eliza. Beauchamp immediately fled the scene and ran off to where he had buried his change of clothes. He stripped off the disguise and changed into his reserve outfit. He then tied his disguise to a rock and threw it in the Kentucky River. Now, in his new clothes, he returned to his room for the night. The murder sent shockwaves throughout Frankfurt the next morning, and a reward for the murder was quickly put out. The governor offered a $3,000 reward. The trustees of Frankfurt put up an additional $1,000, and friends and family of Sharp raised an additional $2,000. Authorities had 3 different men in mind as suspects. One was Patrick H. Darby. He had been heard saying just days before that if Sharp won the election, quote, he would never take his seat and would be as good as a dead man. Another suspect was John Upshaw Waring, the mastermind behind the flyer and pamphlet printing propaganda during the campaign. Waring had also made similar threats against Sharp as Darby had, as well as bragging that Waring himself had already stabbed 6 different men before. The third suspect was none other than Jeroboam Beauchamp himself, because of his past attempts and his known presence in the town that day. Authorities focused their efforts on John Waring first. He had bragged about stabbing people before, after all, but that investigation quickly fell apart when they discovered that Waring was bedridden, having been shot in the hip the day before Sharp's murder. Next, they look at Patrick Darby, but Darby was outraged by this. When he found out he was a suspect, he hired men and conducted his own separate investigation. Darby uncovered a man named John F. Lowe that had said that Beauchamp was in town and that Beauchamp had told him of his plans to go after Sharp. Lowe gave Darby a written account of all that Beauchamp had said, details that fit almost perfectly. An investigative interview with Joel Scott, the man that Beauchamp had rented a room from, gave them further evidence. Around midnight on the night of the murder, Scott was awakened by a noise coming from Beauchamp's room. When he went to check, the door latch was open and the room was empty. Beauchamp attempted to cover his tracks. After leaving Frankfurt, he stayed the next night with a relative in Bloomfield, then took a room in Bardstown before making his way back to Bowling Green. Back home, he stayed another night at the home of his brother-in-law before finally returning home to his wife Anna. Beauchamp and Cook immediately made plans to flee to Missouri, but before the sun could even set, a posse from Frankfort were at the door and Beauchamp was under arrest. He was taken back to Frankfort for trial, but attorney Charles Bibb had not collected enough evidence yet to justify holding him. Beauchamp was released under the agreement that he stay in Frankfort for 10 days to allow the courts to finish their investigation. While waiting, Beauchamp wrote letters to multiple offices requesting legal aid, but none were ever answered. Finally, it was Beauchamp's own uncle who put together a defense team. During the investigation, evidence was sketchy at best. A knife was taken from Beauchamp during his arrest, but the blade type could not be matched with the wound on Sharp's body. They tried to match a footprint that was left behind at the scene with that of Beauchamp, but that was unsuccessful as well. A bloody handkerchief had been retrieved from the crime scene, but it was lost as the posse traveled from Frankfort to Bowling Green. The only solid evidence that they had was what Sharp's wife, Eliza, had witnessed, but due to Beauchamp's disguise, she did not recognize him. But it was Beauchamp's voice that Eliza could point out. She remembered it as clear as day, since Beauchamp had a unique, high-pitched voice. That, coupled with the information Patrick Darby had uncovered in his own investigation, convinced the state to take it to trial in their next session in March of 1826. During the trial, Anna had went to both John Waring and John Lowe for help, trying to convince them to lie and testify on Beauchamp's behalf, but both men turned her away. Anna was then brought up on charges of accessory to murder, but was acquitted due to the lack of evidence. Despite shaky evidence against Beauchamp, though, the jury only deliberated for 1 hour before convicting Jeroboam Beauchamp of murder. He was sentenced to execution by hanging on June 16, 1826. After the trial, Beauchamp finally confessed and offered a written statement to the courts. "I put on my mask, drew my dagger, and proceeded to the door. I knocked 3 times loud and quick. Colonel Sharp said, 'Who's there?' 'Covington,' I replied. Quickly, Sharp's foot was heard upon the floor. I saw under the door as he approached without a light. I drew my mask over my face, and immediately Colonel Sharp opened the door. I advanced into the room, and with my left hand I grasped his right wrist. The violence of the grasp made him spring back, and trying to disengage his wrist, he said, 'What Covington is this?' I replied, 'John A. Covington.' 'I don't know you,' said Colonel Sharp. 'I know John W. Covington.' Mrs. Sharp appeared at the partition door and then disappeared. Seeing her disappear, I said in a persuasive tone of voice, 'Come to the light, Colonel, and you will know me.' And pulling him by the arm, he came readily to the door, and still holding his wrist with my left hand, I stripped my hat and handkerchief from over my forehead and looked into Sharp's face. He knew me the more readily, I imagine, by the long, bush, curly suit of hair. He sprang back and exclaimed in a tone of horror and despair, 'Great God, it is him!' And as he said that, he fell on his knees. I let go of his wrist and grasped him by the throat, dashing him against the facing of the door, and muttered in his face, 'Die, you villain!' As I said that, I plunged the dagger into his heart." While awaiting execution, Anna was allowed to stay in the cell with Beauchamp, and a stay of execution was granted until July 7th. During their stay in jail, the couple was accused of trying to bribe a guard to let them escape, but that didn't work. They even wrote a letter to a senator asking for help in escaping. And 2 days before the execution, Anna petitioned the governor for another stay of execution, but that request was denied. After that denial, the couple tried taking their own lives by overdosing on laudanum, but they both survived. It seemed there was no other way to avoid the looming execution, and the day finally arrived. On the morning of July 7th, 1826, the scheduled day of the execution, Anna requested privacy from the guard so she could get dressed. The guard allowed it, and Anna tried once again to overdose on laudanum, but this time she could not keep it down. It was then that the couple turned to their last resort. Anna had smuggled a knife into jail, and the Beauchamp couple attempted a double suicide by stabbing each other. They were quickly discovered, but it was too late. Well, almost too late. Anna was rushed to the jailer's home and tended to by doctors. And Beauchamp, well, he was rushed to the gallows. It seems that the state of Kentucky wanted it done their way. Beauchamp was already weak from blood loss, but put up as much of a fight as he could. He demanded to see his wife before he would be executed. He wanted to know that she was okay. Doctors that had been addressing his own wounds told him that Anna's wounds were just superficial and that she would make a full recovery. Beauchamp remained insistent though, and ultimately they agreed to take him to see Anna one last time. There in the jailer's home, Beauchamp became furious at the sight. It was clear that the doctors had lied to him. Anna laid on a couch, too weak to even speak. Beauchamp was allowed to go to his wife's side, and there he stayed until her last heartbeat. It's reported that he then kissed her lifeless lips and whispered, "For you I lived, for you I die." By this point, Beauchamp's own wounds had taken their toll, and he was too weak to even stand. He was loaded onto a cart and taken to the gallows, where his near lifeless body had to be carried up the steps. Jeroboam Beauchamp was held up by men on either side of him, a bloody mess, and the rope was secured around his neck. On July 7th, 1826, Jeroboam Beauchamp became Kentucky's first legal hanging, as if it was even needed at that point, in front of a crowd of 5,000 spectators. Beauchamp's father requested the bodies, and at the previous request of the couple, the remains of Anna and Jeroboam Beauchamp were positioned in a loving embrace within a single coffin. They were buried in Maple Grove Cemetery in Bloomfield, Kentucky. The story and events continued to captivate the people of Kentucky, it going on to be known in history as the Beauchamp-Sharp Tragedy, or sometimes simply the Kentucky Tragedy. Because of the politics involved in the events, many versions continued to circulate to try and help bolster support for both the Old Court and New Court parties. Old Court partisans trying to justify it as an honor killing, while New Court partisans claimed that Beauchamp had been incited to violence by Old Court members. The story continued to spread over the years, and a few fictionalized versions were even published. In 1835, almost 10 years after the murder, a struggling playwright working for the Southern Literary Messenger decided to base a play on the Kentucky tragedy. To date, the writer had found no success, but felt that this would be the one to catapult him to fame. He took the events and based the story in 16th century Rome rather than modern-day Kentucky. The first scene was published in the Southern Literary Messenger in December of 1835 under the title Scenes from an Unpublished Drama. A second scene was published a month later in January of 1836, but readers did not like it at all. Reviews were so negative that the writer not only never finished the play, but ultimately gave up on the dream of being a playwright altogether, deciding rather to focus on poetry and short stories instead. It would be another 10 years before that writer ever found commercial success. But in 1845, his first critically acclaimed piece was published for the first time. That writer, named Edgar Allan Poe, called his first piece The Raven. What a strange web Southern history can weave sometimes, right? Tragedies remain popular for a reason, and this is one that continued to captivate people even today. The history itself is gripping, at least for me. I couldn't help but feel a touch of sadness and mercy for Anna and Jeroboam Beauchamp in their final moments, regardless of their actions that led them to that state. It's something about their dedication to each other in the end that steals the show, not only for me, but even for someone as prolific as Poe. Not sure what that says about me, but that's a whole different can of worms. A tale of love, a tale of tragedy, a tale of political intrigue. This one seems to have it all. And it's a great example of the old saying, sometimes truth is stranger than fiction.